Chapter 1. A Drama in 4 Acts. The best place to start is always at the beginning. That's what the Bible does in Genesis and in John, but these are two different beginnings. We'll be starting at the beginning too, but we're going to yet another beginning. John 8 verse 44 says, "You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it." This, of course, is the beginning of sin. At the moment of its inception, sin held in its very being the twin evils of murder and untruthfulness. It has never changed, but the verse also speaks of the truth. This is not a reference to honesty as a general principle. The truth is what Lucifer walked away from when sin entered his mind and heart. We all know that the Bible says sin is the transgression of the law, or as in some modern versions, sin is lawlessness. And since your law is truth, it all seems simple and consistent, though perhaps a bit nebulous. Since sin differed from God's will, we may assume that Lucifer, at some tragic point in time, came to believe that he had a better grasp of the situation than God did, that he, Lucifer, the highest of the angels, would be better served following his own plan rather than following God's plan. Did he convince himself that it was in others' best interest as well? Did he see himself as the benefactor of the universe? If so, it was only the first of many such cases of self-deception. What actually mattered was that he didn't think God's plan was in his best interest. In other words, God wasn't taking care of Lucifer as well as Lucifer could take care of Lucifer. That, right there, is the basic lie. From it come all manner of sins. 1. If I don't believe God will take care of me, that's a loss of faith. 2. If I think I can do a better job of taking care of myself than God can, that's pride and stupidity, by the way. 3. If I try taking care of myself in some way, other than what God asks me to, that's plain old disobedience. 4. If my influence convinces someone else that self-serving is a better law of life than service, that's lying. 5. And if I put myself first, instead of loving my neighbor as myself, that's stealing, and, under enough pressure, it will become murder. This is all wrong, and it has been a problem for us ever since Lucifer deceived Eve and persuaded Adam that he had a better plan for them than God did. And so we ask, why did God let Satan sin? Why didn't he just vaporize him and get it over with? Those may be fair questions, but they are only one small step away from saying God should have vaporized him, which is to say, God didn't take care of my best interest. I could do a better job. And thus we usually manage to convince ourselves that we are at least looking for answers to the big question. Seldom, though, do we realize the starkness of the issues the rest of the universe is focused on. They look at the origin of sin and recognize the central question. Can God be trusted, even when he says to do something that makes no sense to me? Even now, when he says some angels and some people must die? Even when he says he wants to bring human sinners back to heaven, but completely closes the door on my angelic friends? Before we look at God's response to all this, we need to understand that self-serving actually is a big deal. It might seem to be making a mountain out of a molehill to get so wrought up over a difference of opinion. Why not just live and let live? And for that matter, why pay any attention to it all? To answer those questions in a way that makes sense is the purpose of the next 22 chapters. For now, we'll illustrate the value of faith by saying, if you believe the spirit of prophecy, you can see from these quotations about the law of life that self-serving is a big issue. 1. Self-renouncing love is the law of life. 2. The circuit of beneficence is the law of life. 3. The great law of life is a law of service. 4. To give is to live. 5. Self-sacrifice is the law of self-preservation. 6. Self-renunciation is the great law of self-preservation, and self-preservation is the law of self-destruction. And so, the contrast between the truth and the lie was stark. God said, "Trust me, I will freely provide all that is truly for your good. I only ask that you make the good of others your first interest." And Lucifer said, "God has placed other considerations above my best interest. For that, he cannot be trusted, and I must care for myself at others' expense if need be." How high were the stakes? Perhaps an illustration will help. Pretend that 100 people were stranded on a conveniently uninhabited tropical island. How would the society structure itself? On one end of the spectrum is something like this: "Listen up, everyone. We've got to stick together for safety. Never leave camp without telling someone, and never leave camp alone. As long as we take care of each other, we'll all be okay." On the other end of the spectrum is this: "This is bad. Who knows what sort of situation we're up against? And what do I know about all these people? I better get a club, maybe make a knife from some scrap metal. Need to be looking out for number 1. Both scenarios are easy to imagine, and both approaches might actually work to keep people alive. Unless there is only enough food on the island to support 20 people. Then what? Simple human reason tells us that generosity becomes suicide. And so the question comes down to this: can I follow the golden rule in dealing with others and trust God to supply for my best good? Or am I better off reserving the right to take care of myself first? How do you fight a lie? Lucifer's influence spread. Questions were raised much faster than answers were coming. Could God be trusted? Or is self-serving the next big thing? Should I believe God or Lucifer? It may be helpful to think of this whole situation as an exercise in divine damage control, not that foreign to something in Public Relations 101. But when it comes to combating negative propaganda, the simple answer is that there is no way to pronounce oneself honest and trustworthy. Once the doubt was implanted, the only remedy God could use was demonstration. For anything less, the response would be, "You can say you're honest, but why should I believe you? You might be lying to me," like Lucifer said. Stage 1. And so began what we know today as the Great Controversy. Let's look at that, but let's start when Jesus was talking to the 70 disciples who had just come back from their missionary tour. They said, "Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name." And Jesus said something a little strange. According to Luke, his first response was, Luke 10 verse 18 says, "And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." When did this happen? When did Satan fall like lightning from heaven? When he sinned and got kicked out, obviously. And any good Seventh-day Adventist would likely think of this passage. Revelation 12 verses 7 through 9 says, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." In passing, we should note that linking these two passages in our minds like this amounts to equating Jesus' word fall with John's phrase cast out. Also, before we go on, let's put a label on this occasion of Satan's fall. We'll call it Stage 1 for reasons that will be apparent shortly. But now we move on to Stage 2, and the plot thickens slightly. Notice this verse. John 12 verse 31 says, "Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out." Again, these are Jesus' words, but on a different occasion. This was said just shortly before the crucifixion, and Jesus set it clearly in the future tense. We generally see the near future now that he spoke of as the crucifixion. But that prompts us to ask if cast out in this verse is the same as the cast out in Revelation 12. If so, would that mean that Revelation 12 is in some way speaking of the cross? Maybe this will help. Desire of Ages, 761, says, Christ bowed his head and died, but he held fast his faith and his submission to God. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Revelation 12, verse 10. Why is Ellen White quoting that verse when she's talking about the crucifixion? We just looked at verses 7-9 and saw the fall of Satan from heaven back before the creation of our world. How could the very next verse be talking about the crucifixion? And for what it's worth, is there any difference between the cast down in this verse and the cast out in verse 9? Don't worry, this next quotation will start to make sense of it. After the crucifixion, Satan saw that he had overreached himself. Satan saw that his disguise was torn away, that the character he had tried to fasten on Christ was fastened on himself. It was as if he had the second time fallen from heaven. Manuscript Releases, Volume 12. At the cross? The second time? It's like there is something about these two events, the fall of Satan in heaven and the death of Christ on the cross, that is so similar that inspired writers get them all mixed up together. Fascinating. Actually, Ellen White sometimes made the linkage even stronger. God looked upon the victim expiring on the cross and said, It is finished. The human race shall have another trial. The redemption price was paid, and Satan fell like lightning from heaven. Youth's Instructor, June 21st, 1900. But he wasn't even in heaven then. How could he fall from heaven? And on that happy note, we will move on. Stage 3. These verses are familiar. Indeed, we just read the first one a moment ago. Nevertheless, read them again and think of the big picture. Revelation 12, verses 10 through 12 says, Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Notice the details. 1. The accuser of our brethren has been cast down. 2. A group of people have beaten the devil, placing their lives at risk in the process. 3. Because they overcame, everyone in the heavens rejoices. 4. But everyone on earth or in the sea is in trouble because the devil is running out of time, and he's really mad about it. Now just step back mentally, look at that sequence and ask yourself, what does this sound like? When is all this supposed to happen? Yes, you're right. It does sound like the time of the end. That's the way Ellen White used it here. The Apostle John in vision heard a loud voice in heaven exclaiming, Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea! For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Revelation 12:12. Fearful are the scenes which call forth this exclamation from the heavenly voice. The wrath of Satan increases as his time grows short, and his work of deceit and destruction will reach its culmination in the time of trouble. The Great Controversy, page 623. So now we've got 3 separate historical episodes portrayed in Revelation chapter 12. It may seem confusing, but hold on. It gets better. Notice that group of people who beat the devil in the last days. For general purposes at least, we might call them the 144,000. Here's a statement that fits in with them right at this point. We don't have all the pieces in place yet to get this one locked into the puzzle properly, but it's worth a moment's thought anyway. Satan is an accuser of the brethren, and his accusing power is employed against those who work righteousness. The Lord desires through his people to answer Satan's charges by showing the results of obedience to right principles. Christ's Object Lessons, page 296. This role of God's people will come up again. And the right principles spoken of here are important too. But let's just note that this process is accomplished through showing more than through telling. And now we're circling back on our trail to right where we started, but this time it's stage 4. Like the apostles, the 70 had received supernatural endowments as a seal of their mission. When their work was completed, they returned with joy, saying, "Lord, even the devils are subject unto us through thy name." Jesus answered, "I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven." This is familiar, but notice what Ellen White sees in this occasion that we might not have. The scenes of the past and the future were presented to the mind of Jesus. He beheld Lucifer as he was first cast out from the heavenly places. He looked forward to the scenes of his own agony, when before all the worlds the character of the deceiver should be unveiled. He heard the cry, "It is finished," John 19:30, announcing that the redemption of the lost race was forever made certain, that heaven was made eternally secure against the accusations, the deceptions, the pretensions that Satan would instigate. Beyond the cross of Calvary, with its agony and shame, Jesus looked forward to the great final day, when the prince of the power of the air will meet his destruction in the earth so long marred by his rebellion. Jesus beheld the work of evil forever ended, and the peace of God filling heaven and earth. Henceforward, Christ's followers were to look upon Satan as a conquered foe. Upon the cross, Jesus was to gain the victory for them. That victory he desired them to accept as their own. "Behold," he said, "I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you." Desire of Ages, page 490. Do you see all 4 stages of the process? The scenes of past and future? The order is jumbled a bit, so they show up as 1, 2, 4, 3, but they're all there in a single place. Here's an itemized list. 1. 6,000 years ago, the members of the Godhead understood Satan's plans and arguments and rejected them because omniscience knew from all eternity the evil of sin. 2. 2,000 years ago, angels and the inhabitants of the unfallen worlds understood Satan's plans and arguments and rejected them because they saw the murderous character of Satan revealed at the cross. 3. Near future, hopefully, the 144,000 will understand Satan's plans and arguments and will reject them because obedience to right principles has prepared them to understand and successfully resist the fiercest temptations ever brought to mortal man. 4. 1,000 years later, the wicked will understand Satan's plans and arguments after seeing the course of Satan throughout the conflict with heaven, and they too will reject them. Because the need for this whole process is not understood, people often misunderstand the crucifixion and thus cause themselves a lot of confusion. This is where the whole "it's all done at the cross" problem gets its start. We have plenty of reasons to be thankful for the great controversy concept that has been entrusted to Adventism. Far from being the end of God's work, the cross is, well, somewhere in the middle, chronologically. There were issues that just hadn't been addressed yet. We looked at a statement from Desire of Ages back on page 21 that spoke of Christ's death and quoted Revelation 12:10 in that connection. That was interesting enough, but look at the next 2 paragraphs. Satan saw that his disguise was torn away. His administration was laid open before the unfallen angels and before the heavenly universe. He had revealed himself as a murderer. By shedding the blood of the Son of God, he had uprooted himself from the sympathies of the heavenly beings. Henceforth his work was restricted. Whatever attitude he might assume, he could no longer await the angels as they came from the heavenly courts, and before them accuse Christ's brethren of being clothed with the garments of blackness and the defilement of sin. The last link of sympathy between Satan and the heavenly world was broken, yet Satan was not then destroyed. The angels did not even then understand all that was involved in the great controversy. The principles at stake were to be more fully revealed. And for the sake of man, Satan's existence must be continued. Man as well as angels must see the contrast between the Prince of Light and the Prince of Darkness. He must choose whom he will serve. The Desire of Ages, page 761. So the first thing we see is that the crucifixion revealed Satan's principles in a way that nothing else had ever done. Ellen White specifically says he had revealed himself as a murderer. But hadn't that been done back when Abel was killed? Or by however many million murders there were in the first 4,000 years of Earth's history? Don't they count for something? Well, evidently not as murder victims, in the eyes of angels anyway. How could that be? It seems to be a categorical distinction, and the most significant difference between Jesus and all the rest was that Jesus hadn't sinned. He alone was innocent. Satan had the perfect cover for all the rest. Don't blame me. It's God's law that says sinners have to die. But that line didn't work with Jesus. And all the universe learned something that they had never really known before. That's the power of demonstration. But the statement goes on, the last link of sympathy was gone now, at least with the unfallen worlds. Bear in mind that the word sympathy doesn't always mean the, oh, you poor thing, you kind of sympathy. This was more the, I sympathize with your position, kind of philosophical or intellectual sympathy. And after the cross, that was gone. And yet the process of discrediting Satan's false positions must go on. There were things for both men and angels still to learn. Stop a moment and think about that. For the sake of man, Satan's existence must be continued idea. If you've ever wanted to say, oh, you shouldn't have, this might be the time. But you would be wrong, of course. God should have, and he did, because the long-term gain more than justifies the process of demonstration. It's the only way to learn these lessons well. Speaking of learning lessons, think about stage 3 for a moment. Basically, this is the 144,000 who will learn that they have no cause for sympathy with the devil either. Think of it this way. Adam and Eve chose the knowledge of good and evil. How much evil do you think God's people are going to have to learn about? Or think of it this way, Jesus promises that he won't allow us to be tempted above that ye are able, and we rightly take comfort in the promise. But what do you suppose Satan's doing with that? Can you imagine the interfering with the investigation and tampering with the witness claims he is making? And he's got a point. How can God say that his people have rejected Satan's plan of government if he's never even been able to give them his best sales pitch? No, this job is not over yet, but the plan is in place and the process is well underway. One day it will be finished, and all will see that methodically, step by step, the Lord has provided the demonstration that alone could vindicate his government. One group after another, sometimes willingly, sometimes only through force of circumstances, has seen that God's ways are, and always have been, perfect. Just 4 steps. It almost seems simple, but it isn't. It's so complicated, so difficult, so costly, that sometimes even Satan has been left wondering what God would do next. But when it's done, it will be seen by all that there was no other possible means to do what God has done. In the next 2 chapters, we'll see some of that complexity, some of the elegance with which this crisis is being handled. We'll also see what God will do about the one class of people not covered in the steps above.